The bitter October wind sliced through Kathleen Dawson's threadbare dress as she staggered along the dusty trail that led to Promise Creek, clutching her infant son tighter against her chest. Blood from her split lip mingled with tears as she adjusted the faded woolen shawl to conceal the baby's tiny face from both the harsh elements and any prying eyes that might be following. It was 1876, and the western frontier offered little mercy for a young woman alone with a child. 3 days ago, she'd fled from her husband's cabin after his drunken rage had nearly cost both her life and that of little Thomas, born just 2 months prior. Kathleen had waited until Daniel passed out, then grabbed what little she could carry along with her precious boy, and disappeared into the night. The setting sun cast long shadows across the Montana plains as exhaustion finally overwhelmed her. Her legs gave way beneath her weight, and she collapsed onto the hard-packed earth of the trail. Thomas began to fuss, his small hands pushing against the confines of the shawl. "Hush now, my love," she whispered, rocking him gently despite the trembling in her own limbs. "We must stay quiet." The distant sound of hoofbeats sent terror spiraling through her veins. Had Daniel sobered up enough to come looking for her? She scrambled off the trail, seeking refuge behind a cluster of juniper bushes. The baby sensed her fear and began to whimper louder, his tiny face scrunching up in preparation for a full-throated cry. "Please, Thomas," she begged, fumbling to loosen her bodice with one hand while keeping him hidden beneath the shawl. "Just a bit longer, sweetheart." The hoofbeats grew closer, the steady rhythm indicating an unhurried pace. Kathleen held her breath, willing her son to quiet as she tucked him to her breast beneath the concealing fabric. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as a tall figure on horseback came into view. The last rays of sunlight glinted off the rider's revolver, casually holstered at his hip. His broad shoulders were draped in a long duster, and a well-worn Stetson sat low on his forehead. He wasn't Daniel, that much she could tell from his build and the way he sat his horse, but that didn't mean he wasn't dangerous. Thomas chose that moment to let out a muffled cry. The rider pulled his horse to a stop, his head turning in her direction with predatory precision. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice deep but not threatening. "I can hear you, so you might as well show yourself." Kathleen remained frozen, one hand pressed against her baby's back beneath the shawl, the other gripping a small kitchen knife she'd stolen from Daniel's cabin. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the ground. He approached her hiding place with cautious steps. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said, hands held slightly away from his weapons. "Just passing through to Promise Creek." Promise Creek, the very place she was headed. Rumor had it that her cousin lived there now, married to a shopkeeper. It was her only hope for shelter. The stranger's shadow fell across her hiding place. "Madam?" His tone changed when he spotted her, concern evident in that single word. Kathleen raised her eyes, taking in the man before her. He wasn't as old as she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 at most. His face, partially hidden by several days' growth of beard, had a gentleness that seemed at odds with the hardness in his blue eyes. "Are you hurt?" he asked, kneeling down to her level but maintaining enough distance not to frighten her further. Thomas squirmed beneath the shawl, making his presence known despite her efforts to keep him hidden. The stranger's gaze dropped to the movement beneath her shawl, his expression shifting from concern to understanding. "You've got a little one." Kathleen tightened her grip on the knife. "Stay back," she warned, her voice hoarse from thirst and fear. He nodded slowly, settling back on his heels. "Name's Declan Archer. I've got water and food if you need it." "I don't need your charity," she replied, though her parched lips and light-headed state belied her words. "Not offering charity, madam. Just common decency." He reached for his canteen, keeping his movements deliberate and slow. "May I ask where you're headed?" "Promise Creek," she admitted after a moment's hesitation. "My cousin. She might take us in." Declan uncapped the canteen and held it out to her. "I'm headed there myself. Trading post needs new security after some trouble with bandits." Kathleen eyed the water longingly but made no move to take it. Thomas shifted again, a small cry escaping from beneath the shawl. Your baby needs you strong, Declan said softly. Take the water. Slowly, she reached for the canteen with her free hand, never taking her eyes off him. The cool liquid was heaven against her throat, and she had to force herself to drink slowly. Thank you, she murmured, reluctantly handing it back. Declan's eyes moved to the shawl again. May I see the little one? Just to make sure you're both all right. After a moment's hesitation, Kathleen carefully shifted the shawl, revealing Thomas's small face. The baby blinked up at the stranger, his crying momentarily halted by curiosity. A smile transformed Declan's weathered face. He's a handsome fella. His name is Thomas, she said, surprising herself with the admission. And yours? She hesitated again before answering. Kathleen. Kathleen Dawson. Well, Mrs. Dawson, miss. She corrected quickly, the lie coming easily. I'm not married. If Declan noticed the faint outline of a wedding ring beneath the dirt on her finger, he gave no indication. Instead, he glanced at the darkening sky. It'll be full night soon. Promise Creek is still a good 15 miles from here. Not safe for you and the boy to be traveling alone, especially after dark. I'll manage, she insisted, though fear clutched at her heart at the thought of spending another night in the open. I'm sure you would, he replied, respect evident in his tone. But you don't have to. I've got a decent camp set up about a half-mile back. Fire's going, coffee's hot, and there's rabbit stew that'll be ready soon. He paused. You and the boy would be safer there than out here, and we can head to Promise Creek together at first light. Kathleen studied him, searching for signs of deception or threat. His gaze remained steady and open. Why would you help us? She asked finally. Declan stood, dusting off his pants. My ma always said you can measure a man by how he treats those who can't do anything for him in return. He extended a hand to help her up. I give you my word, Miss Dawson, you and your son will be safe with me. No man worthy of the name would leave a woman and child alone out here. Thomas began to fuss again, his small face reddening with hunger and discomfort. He needs to be fed and changed, she admitted, knowing she couldn't delay much longer. My camp has privacy and warmth, Declan offered. And I promise to keep my distance while you tend to him. After another moment's consideration, Kathleen took his offered hand and allowed him to help her to her feet. Her legs wobbled beneath her, and Declan steadied her with a gentle grip on her elbow. Easy now, he murmured. When's the last time you had a proper meal? She couldn't remember. The days had blurred together since her escape. Too long, she finally said. Declan nodded, not pressing further. My horse can carry you both. He's gentle as they come. As if on cue, the chestnut gelding ambled over, nickering softly. Declan led the animal to Kathleen's side. This is Bruno, he said, patting the horse's neck. He's carried worse burdens than a pretty woman and her baby. A flush of color touched Kathleen's pale cheeks at his casual compliment. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with kindness, let alone admiration. With Declan's help, she mounted the horse, adjusting her position to keep Thomas secure against her chest. The height made her dizzy for a moment, but the solid warmth of the animal beneath her was reassuring. Declan took Bruno's reins and began leading them down the trail. Camp's just beyond that ridge, he explained, pointing to a low hill ahead. You can rest there while I finish preparing supper. As they walked, Kathleen studied the broad shoulders of the man who had so unexpectedly come to their aid. There was strength there, certainly, but none of the coiled violence she had come to associate with Daniel. Declan Archer moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, not the swagger of someone with something to prove. True to his word, they soon came upon a well-organized campsite tucked into a protected hollow. A small fire crackled cheerfully, with a pot suspended above it that released tantalizing aromas. A lean-to shelter had been constructed against a large boulder, offering protection from the wind. Everything was neat and orderly, the mark of a man accustomed to caring for himself on the trail. Declan helped her dismount and led her to a bedroll laid out near the fire. "Rest here," he instructed. "I'll see to Bruno and give you some privacy to tend to your boy." Kathleen sank onto the bedroll gratefully, the warmth of the fire seeping into her chilled bones. As promised, Declan busied himself with the horse on the opposite side of the camp, his back turned to afford her privacy. She unwrapped Thomas from his swaddling, checking him over with the concerned eye of a mother. Despite their ordeal, he seemed in good spirits now that they were warm and safe. After changing his soiled cloth and feeding him, she wrapped him snugly once more, marveling at how peacefully he slept in her arms despite everything they'd been through. "Is it safe to turn around?" Declan called after some time had passed. "Yes," she replied, adjusting her dress and tucking Thomas back beneath her shawl, though she left his face uncovered now that they were in the relative safety of the camp. Declan approached with 2 tin plates heaped with steaming stew. "Nothing fancy," he said, handing one to her. "But it's hot and filling." Kathleen balanced the plate on her lap and took a tentative bite. The rich flavor of rabbit and wild onions flooded her mouth, and she had to restrain herself from wolfing it down. "This is wonderful," she murmured between bites. "Thank you." Declan smiled, the firelight highlighting the crinkles around his eyes. "Glad you like it. Been feeding myself on the trail for nigh on 12 years now. You learn a few tricks or starve." 12 years is a long time to be wandering," she observed, curious despite herself. He shrugged, his gaze fixed on the fire. "Never found a reason to stop, I suppose. The war left a lot of us without anchors." "You fought?" she asked, noting the way his shoulders tensed slightly at the mention. "Union cavalry," he confirmed. "Seems like another lifetime now." Kathleen recognized the look in his eyes, the same distant gaze she'd seen in her father's eyes when he spoke of his time fighting the Mexicans. Some memories were better left undisturbed. "What takes you to Promise Creek?" she asked, changing the subject. Declan seemed grateful for the shift. "Got word they need someone with experience handling trouble. Trading post owner fellow named Wilson sent word to Fort Benton that they've had problems with a gang moving through the territory. I've done similar work before." "You're a lawman?" He shook his head. "Not officially. Just a man who's good with a gun and knows how to keep his head when others are losing theirs." He spooned the last of his stew into his mouth before asking, "And your cousin? What's her name? I might know of her if she's in Promise Creek." Kathleen hesitated. "Sarah Miller now. She was Sarah Dawson before she married." Declan nodded thoughtfully. "Don't recall the name, but Promise Creek isn't large. Shouldn't be hard to find her." He paused, studying her face in the firelight. "If you don't mind my asking, what brings you out here alone with a little one? It's not exactly safe country for traveling, especially not on foot." Kathleen lowered her eyes, debating how much to reveal. This stranger had shown her nothing but kindness, but Daniel had seemed kind once too, before the drinking and the violence started. "I'm starting over," she said finally, keeping her tone neutral. "Thomas and I needed a fresh beginning." Declan's gaze lingered on her split lip and the fading bruise on her cheekbone. Understanding dawned in his eyes, but he asked no further questions. "Well," he said after a moment, "everyone deserves a second chance. Promise Creek's a decent place for one, from what I hear." He stood and collected their empty plates. "You should get some rest. I'll take first watch and wake you at midnight to spell me." Kathleen looked up in surprise. "You don't need to stand watch on my account." "Not just for you," he replied with a small smile. "It's habit out here. Too many things that go bump in the night to sleep soundly without someone keeping an eye out." She nodded, understanding. The wilderness held many dangers, both animal and human. "You and the boy take the lean-to," Declan continued. "It's warmer there, out of the wind." "But it's your shelter," she protested. "And now it's yours for the night," he said firmly. "I've slept under worse conditions than a starry sky beside a warm fire." Too exhausted to argue further, Kathleen carried Thomas to the lean-to. The space was small but cozy, with Declan's bedroll laid out on a thick layer of pine boughs. The earthy scent was comforting, reminding her of happier times from her childhood in Pennsylvania, before her family had moved west seeking better opportunities. She settled onto the bedroll, arranging Thomas securely beside her. From this position, she could see Declan through the opening of the shelter, as he added wood to the fire, and then settled on a fallen log, his rifle across his knees. Despite her intention to remain vigilant, the warmth and relative safety soon lulled her into a deep sleep, the first untroubled rest she'd had since fleeing Daniel's cabin. When she woke, pale morning light was filtering into the lean-to. Thomas still slept peacefully beside her, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Panic surged through her as she realized she'd slept through the night. Declan had never woken her to take a watch. She scrambled out of the shelter, only to find him already awake and tending to a fresh fire. The rich aroma of coffee filled the air, and a small pan of johnnycakes sizzled beside the flames. "Morning," he greeted, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to find her in his camp. "Coffee's almost ready." "You didn't wake me," she accused, though there was little heat in her words. Declan shrugged. "You needed the rest more than I needed the watch. Besides," he added with a half-smile, "you were sleeping so soundly it seemed a shame to disturb you." A cry from the lean-to announced Thomas's awakening. Kathleen turned back to tend to him, grateful for the chance to compose herself. The simple kindness of allowing her to sleep through the night had touched her more deeply than she wanted to admit. By the time she emerged with a freshly changed and fed Thomas, Declan had breakfast laid out on a flat stone beside the fire. "It's not fancy," he said, echoing his words from the night before. "But it'll keep us going until Promise Creek." Kathleen sat cross-legged beside the makeshift table, settling Thomas in the crook of her arm. "Thank you for everything." Declan nodded, acknowledging her gratitude without making her elaborate. "We should reach town by midday if we get moving soon. The weather looks fair, and Bruno's rested." They ate in companionable silence, the morning birds providing all the conversation needed. After breakfast, Declan efficiently broke down the camp while Kathleen prepared Thomas for the journey. Within an hour, they were on the trail, Kathleen and Thomas again riding Bruno while Declan walked alongside, leading the horse. As they traveled, Kathleen found herself studying Declan's profile, noting the strong jaw beneath his beard and the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon. There was a watchfulness to him that spoke of hard experiences, yet he moved with an easy grace that belied his size. "Were you born out west?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "No, madam. Ohio originally. Came west after the war, like a lot of men." "Looking for gold?" A laugh escaped him, genuine and warm. "No, though I tried my hand at prospecting for a spell. Mostly I was just looking for open spaces and fewer ghosts." She understood that sentiment all too well. "And you?" he asked. "You don't have the accent of someone born to the frontier." "Pennsylvania," she replied. "My father moved us west after my mother died. He had notions of building a cattle empire in Montana Territory." "Did he succeed?" Kathleen shook her head. "Fever took him the second winter. I was 16. Declan glanced up at her, his expression softening. "I'm sorry. It was 8 years ago now," she said, though the pain of losing her father had never fully faded. "And after that?" he prompted gently. Kathleen hesitated, but something about Declan's steady presence made her want to confide in him. "I married a man who worked my father's land. Daniel seemed kind at first, solid. I was alone and scared, and he offered protection." Her voice hardened. "Or so I thought." Declan said nothing, but his hand moved to rest briefly on her knee, a gesture of support without intrusion. "When did you leave him?" he asked after a while. 3 days ago," she admitted. "After he..." She trailed off, unconsciously holding Thomas tighter. "You don't need to explain," Declan assured her. "Some men don't deserve the title." They crested a hill, and in the distance, the first buildings of Promise Creek came into view. The small settlement was nestled in a valley beside a winding creek that flashed silver in the midday sun. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and even from this distance, they could make out figures moving about the main street. "There it is," Declan announced. "Your fresh start." Kathleen felt a curious mix of relief and trepidation. Promise Creek represented safety, but also uncertainty. What if Sarah wasn't there? What if she wouldn't take them in? As if reading her thoughts, Declan added, "If your cousin isn't there or can't help, we'll figure something else out. I won't leave you stranded." His simple declaration eased some of her worry. This stranger, who was quickly becoming something more than that, had already shown more genuine concern for her welfare than Daniel had in years of marriage. They descended into the valley, the trail widening as it approached the town. Bruno's pace quickened slightly, sensing rest and feed ahead. Thomas had fallen asleep against Kathleen's chest, lulled by the gentle motion of the horse. Promise Creek proved to be larger than it had appeared from a distance. A main street ran through the center of town, lined with various businesses: a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and what appeared to be a small hotel. Several side streets branched off, dotted with modest homes and workshops. People stopped to stare as they entered town, a common reaction to newcomers in such isolated communities. Kathleen felt exposed under their curious gazes and instinctively adjusted her shawl to better cover Thomas. Declan led them directly to the general store, a 2-story building with "Wilson's Trading Post" painted in faded letters above the door. A covered porch ran the length of the storefront, with several chairs occupied by old-timers watching the world go by. "This is where I'm supposed to meet the owner," Declan explained, helping Kathleen dismount. "Wilson might know where to find your cousin." The interior of the store was dimly lit but well stocked, with goods ranging from basic necessities to small luxuries. A middle-aged man with spectacles was helping a customer at the counter. He glanced up as they entered, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of Declan's imposing figure. "Be with you folks in just a moment," he called out, finishing his transaction. Kathleen took the opportunity to look around, noting the prices on various items. If she couldn't find Sarah, she would need to find work quickly. The meager savings she'd managed to take from Daniel wouldn't last long. The shopkeeper approached them, wiping his hands on his apron. "Welcome to Wilson's. I'm Frederick Wilson. What can I help you with today?" "Declan Archer." Declan introduced himself, extending his hand. "I believe you sent word to Fort Benton about needing security." Recognition dawned on Wilson's face. "Mr. Archer." "Yes, indeed. We weren't expecting you for another few days." His gaze shifted to Kathleen and the baby. "And this is Miss Kathleen Dawson and her son Thomas," Declan replied smoothly. "We met on the trail. Miss Dawson is looking for her cousin, Sarah Miller. I believe she lives here in Promise Creek." Wilson's eyebrows rose. "Sarah Miller?" "Yes, she and her husband Edward run the bakery down the street." He studied Kathleen more closely. "I can see the family resemblance now." Relief washed over Kathleen. "Sarah was here, just as she'd hoped." "The bakery, you said?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. Wilson nodded. 3 buildings down on the left. They live in the apartment above it." "Thank you," she breathed, turning to Declan. "I should go to her now." Declan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Would you like me to accompany you?" Kathleen hesitated. Part of her wanted his reassuring presence beside her, but another part knew this was something she needed to do alone. "I think I should speak with her privately first. Family matters." "Of course," he agreed. "I need to discuss business with Mr. Wilson anyway. Shall I bring your belongings to the bakery later?" "Yes, please." And she paused, suddenly uncertain how to say goodbye to this man who had shown her such kindness. "Thank you again, Mr. Archer. For everything." "Declan," he corrected gently. "And it was my honor, Miss Dawson." With a final nod to both men, Kathleen left the store, her heart pounding with anticipation and nerves. The bakery was easy to find, with a cheerful sign announcing Miller's Bakery and Confectionery hanging above the door. The sweet scent of fresh bread and pastries wafted through the air, making her mouth water despite her anxiety. Taking a deep breath, Kathleen pushed open the door, a small bell announcing her arrival. The shop was warm and inviting, with glass cases displaying an array of baked goods. Behind the counter stood a woman with familiar auburn hair pinned neatly atop her head. "Sarah?" Kathleen called softly. The woman looked up, confusion evident on her face for a moment before recognition dawned. "Kathleen? Kathleen Dawson, is that really you?" Tears sprang to Kathleen's eyes as her cousin rushed around the counter, arms outstretched. "Oh, Sarah, I didn't know where else to go." The cousins embraced, careful not to crush Thomas between them. Sarah pulled back after a moment, her gaze falling to the bundle in Kathleen's arms. "And who is this little one?" she asked, her voice soft with wonder. "This is Thomas," Kathleen replied, adjusting the shawl to reveal her son's face. "My son!" Sarah's expression shifted from joy to concern as she took in Kathleen's appearance more fully, the fading bruises, the worn dress, the exhaustion evident in her eyes. "Come upstairs," she said firmly, turning the sign on the door to closed and locking it. "Edward is out on deliveries, but we've much to talk about, and you look like you could use a proper meal and rest." Within the hour, Kathleen found herself seated at her cousin's kitchen table, Thomas sleeping peacefully in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a drawer lined with soft blankets. A hearty meal of bread, cheese, and stew had taken the edge off her hunger, and Sarah had provided clean clothes that, while a bit large, were a vast improvement over her travel-worn dress. "Now," Sarah said, pouring them both cups of tea, "tell me everything, Kathy." And so Kathleen did. She told of her marriage to Daniel 3 years prior, how his drinking had worsened over time, and how his temper had turned violent after Thomas's birth. She described the night she'd fled, fearing for both her and her baby's lives. Finally, she explained how Declan Archer had found them on the trail and ensured their safe passage to Promise Creek. Sarah listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly somber. When Kathleen finished, her cousin reached across the table and clasped her hands tightly. "You'll stay with us, of course," Sarah declared. "Edward will agree. We've plenty of room, and I've always wanted to be an aunt." Relief washed over Kathleen like a cleansing rain. "I don't want to be a burden, nonsense." Sarah cut her off. "Your family. Besides, I could use the help in the bakery. Edward's been after me to hire someone, but I've been too stubborn to admit I can't do it all myself." A knock at the downstairs door interrupted their conversation. Sarah rose to peer out the window. "There's a rather large gentleman at the door," she reported. "Handsome, too, in a rugged sort of way." Kathleen's heart quickened. "That would be Declan. He offered to bring my belongings." Sarah gave her a knowing look that Kathleen chose to ignore as they descended to the shop. Declan stood outside, his tall frame visible through the glass. Sarah unlocked the door to admit him. "Mr. Archer, I presume," she greeted warmly. "I'm Sarah Miller, Kathleen's cousin. Please come in." Declan removed his hat as he stepped inside, revealing tousled dark hair. "Madam," he acknowledged with a respectful nod. "I brought Miss Dawson's things, as promised." He held up the small bundle that contained everything Kathleen had managed to take when she fled. "Thank you," Kathleen said, accepting the bundle. "Sarah has generously offered us a place to stay." Relief flickered across Declan's features. "I'm glad to hear it. Mr. Wilson has offered me accommodations above the livery stable as part of my employment, so I'll be nearby if you need anything." An awkward silence fell between them, either quite knowing how to proceed now that their journey together had concluded. It was Sarah who broke the tension. "Mr. Archer, would you care to join us for supper this evening?" "It's the least we can offer after your kindness to Kathleen and little Thomas." Declan glanced at Kathleen, seeming to seek her approval before accepting. "Yes," Kathleen added quickly. Please do join us. I would like to properly thank you. A smile spread across his face, transforming his rugged features. I'd be honored, madam. Wonderful. Sarah beamed. 7 o'clock sharp. Edward will be eager to meet the man who ensured his cousin-in-law's safe arrival. After Declan departed, Sarah turned to Kathleen with a knowing smile. He seems quite taken with you. Don't be ridiculous, Kathleen protested, though she couldn't help the warmth that spread through her at the thought. He's simply a kind man who helped a woman in distress. If you say so, Sarah replied, clearly unconvinced. But I saw how he looked at you, and how you look at him. I'm still married, Sarah, Kathleen reminded her, the reality of her situation dampening her spirits. Sarah's expression grew serious. A marriage like yours can be dissolved, Kathy. Especially given the circumstances. Edward knows the judge in the county seat quite well. Kathleen shook her head. Daniel would never agree to it. He might, if given the right incentive, Sarah mused. But that's a conversation for another day. For now, let's prepare for dinner. I want to hear more about this handsome protector of yours. Despite her protests, Kathleen found herself looking forward to the evening with an anticipation that both thrilled and frightened her. The next few weeks settled into a comfortable routine for Kathleen and Thomas. Sarah and Edward had welcomed them wholeheartedly into their home and business. Kathleen proved to be a natural baker, quickly learning Sarah's recipes and adding a few of her own. Thomas charmed everyone who entered the shop, becoming something of a local attraction. Declan, meanwhile, had established himself as Promise Creek's unofficial peacekeeper. The gang that had been troubling the town made one ill-fated attempt to rob Wilson's store, and found themselves facing Declan's steady aim and unwavering resolve. 3 of the bandits were now awaiting trial in the county jail, while the others had apparently decided that Promise Creek was no longer worth the trouble. What had begun as occasional suppers together soon became regular visits. Declan would stop by the bakery most mornings for coffee and fresh bread, often lingering to chat with Kathleen as she worked. In the evenings, when his duties allowed, he would join the Millers and Kathleen for dinner or accompany them to community gatherings. Though either spoke of it directly, a bond was forming between Kathleen and Declan, a tentative friendship built on mutual respect and growing affection. Kathleen found herself watching the door each morning, anticipating his arrival, while Declan seemed to find more and more reasons to visit the bakery throughout the day. It was Edward who finally addressed the elephant in the room, cornering Declan one evening after dinner, while the women cleared the table. Your intentions toward my wife's cousin, he began without preamble. I'd like to know what they are. Declan met the baker's gaze steadily. Honorable, sir. But complicated by her situation. Edward nodded, satisfied with the straightforward answer. I've been in correspondence with Judge Fleming about her case. He believes there are grounds for an annulment or divorce, given the circumstances. Hope flickered in Declan's eyes. Has she been informed of this? Not yet. Sarah thought it best to wait until we had more concrete information. Edward lowered his voice further. There's also the matter of her husband. If he decides to come looking for her, then he'll find me waiting. Declan finished, his expression hardening. I won't allow him to harm her or the boy. A smile tugged at Edward's lips. I thought you might say that. For what it's worth, Sarah and I approve. Kathleen has been happier these past weeks than I've ever seen her. Before Declan could respond, the women returned to the room, ending their private conversation. The following Sunday, Promise Creek held its monthly social gathering at the small community hall where families came together for music, dancing, and fellowship. It was a chance for the scattered homesteaders and townspeople to reconnect and for young people to court under the watchful eyes of their elders. Kathleen had initially been reluctant to attend, fearing gossip about her situation, but Sarah had insisted, arguing that hiding away would only fuel speculation. So she found herself seated on a bench at the edge of the hall, watching as couples twirled to the lively fiddle music, Thomas sleeping contentedly in a basket beside her. May I join you? Declan's deep voice pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up to find him standing before her, more formally dressed than she had ever seen him. His usual trail clothes had been replaced with a clean white shirt, dark trousers, and a vest. His hair was neatly combed, and his face freshly shaven, revealing a strong jaw that his beard had previously hidden. "Please," she replied, gesturing to the empty space beside her. "You look very handsome tonight." A flush crept up his neck at her compliment. "Thank you. You look beautiful yourself." And she did. Sarah had insisted on lending Kathleen her second-best dress for the occasion, a pretty blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. With her honey blonde hair arranged in soft curls around her face, she looked nothing like the desperate woman Declan had found on the trail. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the dancers. "Would you care to dance?" Declan finally asked, his voice hesitant. Kathleen glanced at Thomas, sleeping peacefully in his basket. "Sarah said she'd watch him," Declan added, following her gaze. "She and Edward are at the refreshment table." Kathleen hesitated, torn between desire and propriety. "I shouldn't. People would talk." "Let them," Declan replied simply. "You deserve some happiness, Kathleen." The way he said her name like something precious made her heart flutter. Before she could talk herself out of it, she nodded. "One dance, then?" Declan's smile was worth any gossip that might follow as he led her to the dance floor. The musicians had just begun a waltz, and he guided her into the circle of dancers with surprising grace for such a large man. "You dance well," she observed as he led her through the steps without hesitation. "My mother insisted all her sons learn," he explained. "Said a man never knows when such skills might be needed. She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," he agreed, a hint of sadness touching his features. "She passed during the war. Influenza." "I'm sorry," Kathleen murmured, understanding the loss all too well. The music swelled around them, and Declan pulled her slightly closer, still proper, but intimate enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. For a few precious minutes she allowed herself to forget everything but the feel of his hand at her waist, the strength in his shoulders beneath her palm, and the way his eyes never left her face. When the dance ended, either moved immediately to separate. It was only when the musicians began a more lively tune that Declan reluctantly released her. "Thank you," he said softly, escorting her back to where Thomas still slept under Sarah's watchful eye. "No, thank you," she replied, meaning far more than just the dance. The evening continued pleasantly, with Declan remaining by her side even as they declined further dances. His presence seemed to deter most of the curious stares and whispers, and by the time they prepared to leave, Kathleen felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. As they walked back to the bakery, Thomas bundled in her arms and Declan carrying the basket, Sarah and Edward tactfully fell several paces behind, giving them a measure of privacy. "I enjoyed tonight," Kathleen admitted, her breath forming small clouds in the cool evening air. "As did I," Declan replied. After a moment's hesitation, he added, "Kathleen, there's something I should tell you." The seriousness of his tone caused her to look up at him questioningly. "What is it?" "Edward has been in contact with the judge about your situation with Daniel. He believes there may be a way to legally end your marriage, given the circumstances." Kathleen stopped walking, her heart pounding in her chest. "Truly?" Declan nodded. "Nothing is certain yet, but there's hope." He met her gaze directly. "I wanted you to know because I care deeply for you and Thomas. More deeply than I thought possible after such a short acquaintance." Declan, The sound of approaching horses interrupted whatever she had been about to say. They both turned to see a group of riders entering the town, dust billowing behind them in the moonlight. Even at a distance, something about the lead rider's posture sent a chill of recognition through Kathleen. "No," she whispered, clutching Thomas tighter. "It can't be." But as the riders drew closer, there was no mistaking the broad shoulders and distinctive hat of the man in front. Daniel Dawson had found them. Declan's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm. Is that him? Unable to speak, Kathleen nodded, fear paralyzing her as memories of Daniel's rage flooded her mind. Get to the bakery, Declan ordered, his voice low and urgent. Now. Sarah and Edward had caught up to them, and Edward quickly assessed the situation. Come on, he urged, taking Kathleen's elbow. Let's get you and Thomas inside. But it was too late. Daniel had spotted them and was steering his horse directly toward their small group, his companions following close behind. Well, he called out, his words slightly slurred. If it ain't my darling wife, out for an evening stroll with her bastard. Declan stepped forward, positioning himself between Kathleen and the approaching riders. Mr. Dawson, I presume? Daniel's eyes narrowed as he took in Declan's protective stance. And who the hell might you be? Someone who doesn't appreciate your tone or your presence, Declan replied evenly. Miss Dawson is under this town's protection now. I suggest you move along. A harsh laugh escaped Daniel as he dismounted, swaying slightly as his feet hit the ground. Miss Dawson? That's rich. She's my wife, mister, and that's my property she stole. His bloodshot eyes fixed on Thomas. Though that brat ain't mine, that's for damn sure. Kathleen felt as though she'd been struck. How dare you? She breathed. Thomas is your son. Like hell he is. Daniel spat. I ain't stupid, woman. I can count months same as any man. That bastard was born too early to be mine, unless you think I'm fool enough to believe he came 2 months before his time. Gasps from Sarah and Edward made Kathleen's cheeks burn with shame and anger. You're drunk, Daniel. You don't know what you're saying. Drunk I may be, but I know you were carrying another man's get when you tricked me into marrying you. He took a menacing step forward. Now you're coming home with me, and we'll discuss what's to be done with that brat. Declan's hand closed around his revolver. That's close enough. One of Daniel's companions, a weasel-faced man with a patchy beard, spoke up. Careful, Dan. That's Declan Archer. Heard tell he's killed more men than smallpox. Daniel hesitated, eyeing Declan with newfound wariness. This ain't your business, Archer. I'm making it my business, Declan replied. By now, other townspeople who had been walking home from the social had stopped to observe the confrontation, forming a loose circle around them. Daniel's gaze swept the growing crowd, seeming to realize he was outnumbered. Fine, he said after a moment. We'll handle this proper like. I'll be speaking to the sheriff in the morning about my wife and my property. His eyes locked on Kathleen, malice evident in their depths. Don't think this is over. With that, he remounted his horse and led his companions toward the saloon at the far end of the street. The moment they were out of sight, Kathleen's legs gave way. Only Declan's quick reflexes kept her from collapsing entirely. Let's get her inside, Sarah urged, concern etched on her face. Together, they hurried Kathleen and Thomas into the bakery, locking the door firmly behind them. Edward immediately went to check that all the other entrances were secured, while Sarah helped Kathleen to a chair. His accusations, Kathleen whispered, tears streaming down her face. They're not true. Thomas is his son. I've never been with anyone else. We know, Sarah soothed, though doubt flickered briefly in her eyes. Daniel is just trying to hurt you. Declan knelt before Kathleen, taking her trembling hands in his. Listen to me. Regardless of what Daniel claims, I made you a promise when I found you on that trail. You and Thomas will be safe. I intend to keep that promise. How? Kathleen asked, despair threatening to overwhelm her. He'll go to the law. They'll force me to return to him. Not necessarily, Edward interjected, returning from his inspection of the house. Daniel made those accusations publicly, in front of witnesses. That, combined with your visible injuries when you arrived and his obvious drunkenness tonight, could work in our favor with Judge Fleming. Edward's right, Sarah added. And Promise Creek stands with you, Kathleen. We've all seen what kind of man you are, and what kind Daniel is. Kathleen looked down at Thomas, who had somehow slept through the entire confrontation. His innocent face, so trusting and vulnerable, strengthened her resolve. "I won't let him take my son," she declared. "I'll die first." "It won't come to that," Declan assured her, his voice firm. "I'll stay here tonight, keep watch. Tomorrow, we'll send word to Judge Fleming and request an emergency hearing." Edward nodded in agreement. "I'll ride out at first light to the county seat. Fleming owes me a favor. He should agree to hear the case quickly." As the others discussed plans and precautions, Kathleen found herself studying Declan's face, marveling at how this man who had been a stranger just weeks ago was now risking everything to protect her and Thomas. "Why?" she asked softly when there was a lull in the conversation. "Why are you doing all this for us?" Declan's eyes met hers, unwavering in their intensity. "Because from the moment I saw you protecting your child beneath that shawl, I knew you were someone worth fighting for. And nothing that's happened since has changed my mind." The simple honesty of his words broke something loose inside her, a dam of emotion she'd held back for too long. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a brief, desperate kiss. When she pulled back, both Sarah and Edward were studiously looking elsewhere, giving them the illusion of privacy. Declan's expression was a mix of surprise and something deeper, more profound. "I'm sorry," Kathleen whispered, mortified by her impulsiveness. "Don't be," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Just know that when this is all over, when you're truly free, I'd like to court you properly. If you'll have me." Hope bloomed in her chest, fragile but persistent. "I'd like that." The night passed tensely but without incident. Declan maintained his vigil in the bakery's front room, while Edward took turns standing watch. By morning, dark circles shadowed both men's eyes, but their determination hadn't wavered. True to his word, Edward set out for the county seat at dawn, carrying documentation of Kathleen's situation and a letter from Declan detailing Daniel's threats. Sarah opened the bakery as usual, insisting that maintaining normalcy was important, though she kept the back door bolted and a shotgun within easy reach. Kathleen worked alongside her cousin, finding that the familiar tasks of measuring, mixing, and kneading helped calm her frayed nerves. Thomas remained upstairs with Mrs. Abernathy, an elderly widow who had volunteered to watch him when she heard of Kathleen's predicament. The morning passed without sign of Daniel or his companions, though Declan reported they were still in town, having taken rooms above the saloon. The tension in Kathleen's shoulders eased slightly as customers came and went, many offering words of support or subtle warnings that Daniel had been asking questions around town. It was mid-afternoon when the bakery door swung open, and Daniel stepped inside alone. He had shaved and changed clothes since the previous night, and his eyes were clear of the alcohol-induced haze. Somehow, this calculated sobriety was more frightening than his drunken rage had been. "Afternoon, ladies," he greeted, his tone deceptively pleasant. "Fine establishment you have here." Declan emerged from the back room before either woman could respond, his hand resting casually near his holster. "Mr. Dawson? I believe I made myself clear last night." Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just having a civil conversation with my wife, Archer. No law against that." "Ex-wife," Kathleen corrected, finding her voice despite the fear churning in her stomach. "I'll never return to you, Daniel. Not after what you did." "Strong words from a woman in your position," Daniel remarked, his gaze sweeping the bakery as if evaluating its worth. "But I'm willing to be reasonable." "You can keep the brat. I just want what's mine, the money and valuables you took when you ran." Kathleen stared at him in disbelief. "The money my father left me, you mean? The jewelry that belonged to my mother?" "Property of a husband includes all that belongs to his wife," Daniel stated, as if reciting a legal principle. "That's the law. Ask anyone." Declan's jaw tightened. "The law also has plenty to say about men who beat their wives, Dawson." A dangerous glint appeared in Daniel's eyes. "Careful with your accusations, Archer. Wouldn't want people thinking you've developed more than a passing interest in another man's wife." The implication hung in the air between them, heavy with threat. Before either man could respond, the door opened again, admitting Frederick Wilson and several other prominent townsmen. "Everything all right here, Declan?" Wilson asked, though his eyes were fixed on Daniel. "Just fine, Mr. Wilson," Declan replied evenly. Mr. Dawson was just leaving. Daniel looked from face to face, seeming to realize he was outmatched. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his gaze returning to Kathleen. "One way or another, I'll get what's mine." With that, he departed, brushing past Wilson with deliberate force. "Charming fellow," Wilson remarked dryly once the door had closed. "We'll keep an eye on him and his friends, Miss Dawson. Don't you worry." Kathleen managed a grateful nod, though her hands trembled as she gripped the counter for support. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson." After the men left, Kathleen sagged against the counter, the strain of the confrontation catching up with her. "He won't stop," she whispered. "Not until he gets what he wants." "Then we'll have to make sure he doesn't," Declan said firmly. "Edward should reach Judge Fleming by tomorrow. Once the legal proceedings begin, Daniel will have less ground to stand on. And if the judge sides with him?" Kathleen couldn't help asking, giving voice to her deepest fear. Declan's expression hardened. "Then we'll find another way. I meant what I said, Kathleen. You and Thomas will be safe, no matter what it takes." 3 tense days passed. Edward returned from the county seat with news that Judge Fleming would hold a hearing the following week. In the meantime, he had issued a temporary order preventing Daniel from removing Kathleen or Thomas from Promise Creek, though it did little to prevent Daniel from making his presence known around town. He and his companions became fixtures at the saloon, drinking heavily and regaling anyone who would listen with tales of Kathleen's supposed infidelity and theft. Some of the more impressionable townspeople began to eye Kathleen with suspicion when she ventured out, though the majority remained firmly supportive. Declan maintained his protective vigil, dividing his time between his duties for Wilson and keeping watch over the bakery. Despite Daniel's provocations, he managed to avoid direct confrontation, though the strain of the situation was evident in the tightness around his eyes and the increasing frequency with which his hands strayed to his weapon. On the 4th night, as Kathleen was closing up the bakery, a rock shattered the front window, sending glass shards flying across the shop floor. A note was wrapped around it, its message brief but chilling. "A fire would be a shame." The threat was enough to convince Wilson and several other business owners to organize a nightly patrol. Daniel and his men were warned that any further trouble would result in their forcible removal from town, regardless of the pending legal proceedings. Through it all, Kathleen found strength she hadn't known she possessed. The woman who had fled into the night with her baby was being replaced by someone who stood her ground and fought for her future. Declan noticed the change, his admiration evident in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't aware. The night before the hearing, after Thomas had been put to bed and the bakery secured for the evening, Kathleen and Declan sat at the kitchen table, reviewing what Edward had learned about the legal process they would face the next day. "Judge Fleming is fair-minded," Declan assured her, covering her hand with his own. "And the evidence is on your side." "But the law isn't," Kathleen replied, voicing the concern that had been gnawing at her. "Married women have few rights, Declan." "If Daniel convinces the judge that Thomas isn't his, he could use that to deny any obligation while still claiming authority over me." "That won't happen," Declan insisted, though his eyes betrayed his own uncertainty. "Fleming isn't the kind of judge who blindly follows the letter of the law when justice demands otherwise." Kathleen managed a weak smile, grateful for his reassurance even if she couldn't fully believe it. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know how much your support has meant to me. To us." She glanced toward the small room where Thomas slept. Declan's expression softened. "Kathleen, The sound of breaking glass and a sudden whoosh of flames from the shop below cut off his words. Smoke began to curl under the door almost immediately. "Fire!" Declan shouted, leaping to his feet. "Get Thomas!" Kathleen ran to her son's room, scooping the startled baby from his cradle and wrapping him in his blanket. The acrid smell of smoke was already filling the upper floor of the building. Declan had thrown open the apartment door, but quickly slammed it shut again. "The stairs are engulfed," he reported, his voice tight with urgency. "We'll have to use the back way." The back way was a narrow external staircase that led from the apartment's kitchen to the alley behind the bakery. It was meant as a delivery entrance but would serve as their escape route now. As they hurried toward the kitchen, a crash from below sent vibrations through the floorboards. The fire was spreading rapidly, consuming the wooden building with frightening speed. "Go," Declan urged, opening the kitchen door to reveal the small landing outside. "I'm right behind you." Clutching Thomas tightly to her chest, Kathleen descended the stairs as quickly as she dared. The night air was blessedly cool after the growing heat of the apartment, though smoke billowed around them, making it difficult to see. When they reached the alley, Kathleen turned to ensure Declan was following just in time to see Daniel and two of his companions step out from the shadows, blocking their path. "Tragic accident," Daniel remarked, gesturing toward the burning building. "Good thing I was nearby to help my wife and child escape." Declan emerged from the stairwell, taking in the situation with a single glance. His hand moved to his holster, but one of Daniel's men already had a gun drawn. "I wouldn't," Daniel advised. "Accidents happen so easily in a fire." Kathleen clutched Thomas closer, shielding him with her shawl as she had done on the trail. The parallel wasn't lost on her, once again fighting to protect her child, once again facing danger with only Declan standing between them and harm. "The whole town will know you did this," Declan growled, his eyes never leaving Daniel's face. "Prove it," Daniel replied with a shrug. "Now, Kathleen, be a good wife and come here. Bring the boy." "Never," she hissed, backing away until she felt Declan's solid presence behind her. Daniel's expression darkened. "Always the difficult one. Fine, we'll do this the hard way." He nodded to his companions, who began to advance. Before they could take more than a step, however, a voice rang out from the end of the alley. "That's far enough." Frederick Wilson stood there, a shotgun leveled at Daniel's group. Behind him were several other townsmen, similarly armed. "The fire brigade's on its way," Wilson announced. "But it seems we've found the arsonists first." Daniel's companions hesitated, looking to him for direction. With a snarl of frustration, Daniel drew his own weapon. "Drop it, Dawson," Declan ordered, his revolver now in hand and aimed steadily at Daniel's chest. "It's over." For a tense moment, it seemed Daniel might choose to fight. Then, with a calculated slowness, he lowered his gun to the ground. "This doesn't change anything," he stated flatly. "The law's on my side. Tomorrow, the judge will order my wife to return to me, and all of you will be facing charges for interfering." "We'll see about that," Wilson replied. "In the meantime, you and your friends are spending the night in the town jail. Judge Fleming can sort it all out in the morning." As Wilson and the others led Daniel and his men away, Declan turned to Kathleen, his face etched with concern. "Are you both all right?" Kathleen nodded, though she couldn't stop trembling. "Thanks to you and Mr. Wilson." The fire brigade arrived soon after, but despite their efforts, the bakery was a total loss. The blaze was contained before it could spread to neighboring buildings, but Sarah and Edward's business and home were reduced to smoldering ruins by dawn. The Wilsons opened their home to Kathleen, Thomas, and the Millers, providing comfortable rooms and assurances that they were welcome to stay as long as needed. Declan insisted on standing guard outside, despite Frederick's protests that it wasn't necessary with Daniel safely locked up. Morning brought news that Judge Fleming had arrived early, alerted by telegram to the previous night's events. He had agreed to convene the hearing immediately at the town hall. The makeshift courtroom was packed with townspeople eager to witness the proceedings. Kathleen sat at a table with Edward, who had offered to present her case. Across the aisle, Daniel sat alone, having been denied the company of his companions, who remained in jail pending charges for the fire. Judge Fleming, a stern-faced man with a shock of white hair and penetrating eyes, called the court to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. "This is an unusual situation," he began, surveying the room over his spectacles. "I have before me petitions from both parties, Mrs. Kathleen Dawson seeking dissolution of her marriage to Mr. Daniel Dawson on grounds of cruelty, and Mr. Dawson seeking the return of his wife and property." He shuffled through some papers before continuing. "I also have reports of a fire at the Miller Bakery last night, allegedly set by Mr. Dawson or his associates, though that matter will be addressed in a separate hearing." Daniel rose to his feet. "Your Honor, these accusations are unfounded. My wife ran away, taking my property and my good name with her. I merely wish for the law to restore what's rightfully mine." "You'll have your say, Mr. Dawson," the judge assured him. "But first, I want to hear from Mrs. Dawson." Kathleen stood, Thomas cradled in her arms. She had dressed in her finest clothes borrowed from Sarah and held herself with dignity despite the churning fear in her stomach. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steadier than she had expected. "3 months ago, I fled my husband's home in fear for my life and the life of my son. Daniel had been drinking heavily since Thomas's birth, and his temper had turned violent." She paused, gathering her courage. "The night I left, he had threatened to throw Thomas out into the cold if he didn't stop crying. When I tried to protect my baby, he struck me repeatedly." Daniel interrupted with a harsh laugh. "That brat isn't even mine, Your Honor. She was already carrying it when we married. Ask anyone who knows when we wed and when it was born." Judge Fleming silenced him with a stern look. "You'll have your turn, Mr. Dawson," Kathleen continued, her voice growing stronger. "Thomas was born 8 weeks early, Your Honor. It's a miracle he survived at all." "I have a letter from the midwife who attended the birth confirming this fact." Edward produced the document, which the judge examined carefully. "Furthermore," Kathleen added, "Daniel knew of the pregnancy when we married. It was, in fact, the reason for our hasty wedding." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "Mrs. Dawson, these are serious allegations. Do you have any evidence of the mistreatment you claim to have suffered?" "I do, Your Honor." She gestured to where Declan sat in the front row. "Mr. Archer found me on the trail to Promise Creek, still bearing the marks of Daniel's last attack. He can attest to my condition." Declan stood when called upon, his testimony clear and precise as he described finding Kathleen bruised and terrified, hiding her baby beneath her shawl. "And what did you do then, Mr. Archer?" the judge inquired. "I swore they would both be safe, Your Honor," Declan replied simply. "And I've done my best to keep that promise." Throughout the morning, more witnesses were called, Sarah and Edward testifying to Kathleen's character and the continuing harassment from Daniel, Frederick Wilson detailing the events surrounding the fire, and several townspeople who had observed Daniel's threatening behavior in Promise Creek. When Daniel finally took the stand, his demeanor was calm and reasonable, a stark contrast to the man Kathleen knew him to be. He spoke of his love for his wife, his disappointment at her betrayal, and his willingness to forgive her indiscretions if she would only return to him. "As for the child," he concluded, "I have no wish to claim another man's bastard, but I would not see him abandoned. If Kathleen returns to her duties as my wife, I will allow the boy to remain in our home." His performance was convincing, so much so that Kathleen felt a wave of despair wash over her. If the judge believed him. But Judge Fleming's expression revealed nothing as he called for a brief recess to consider the evidence presented. As the courtroom emptied, Declan made his way to Kathleen's side. "Whatever happens," he murmured, "remember my promise. I won't let him take you or Thomas." The implication was clear: if the law failed them, Declan was prepared to take more direct action, even if it meant becoming a fugitive himself. When court reconvened an hour later, the tension in the room was palpable. Judge Fleming sat at the bench, his expression grave as he surveyed the assembled parties. "This is a difficult case," he began. "The law regarding marriage is clear in many respects, but it must also serve the interests of justice and the protection of the vulnerable." He turned his attention to Daniel. "Mr. Dawson, while the law does grant significant authority to a husband over his wife and household, it does not sanction cruelty or endangerment. The evidence presented today suggests strongly that you have violated those boundaries." Hope began to rise in Kathleen's chest as the judge continued. Furthermore, the matter of the fire at the Miller bakery, while not directly related to the marriage petition, speaks to a pattern of behavior that this court cannot ignore. Judge Fleming shuffled his papers before delivering his verdict. "It is the finding of this court that the marriage between Danielle and Kathleen Dawson shall be dissolved on the grounds of extreme cruelty. Custody of the minor child, Thomas, is awarded solely to the mother." Relief flooded through Kathleen, so intense that she nearly missed the judge's next words. "Additionally, Mrs. Dawson shall retain all property currently in her possession, including any funds or valuables she removed from the marital home. Mr. Dawson is hereby ordered to remain at least 100 yards from Mrs. Dawson and the child at all times." Daniel leapt to his feet. "This is outrageous. You can't, I can and have, Mr. Dawson," the judge interrupted firmly. "And if you continue to disrupt my courtroom, I will hold you in contempt. Furthermore, you will remain in the custody of the town constable pending investigation into the fire. Court is adjourned." The bang of the gavel was drowned out by the cheers that erupted from the spectators. Kathleen found herself surrounded by well-wishers, Sarah's arms around her shoulders and Edward patting her back enthusiastically. Through the crowd, her eyes found Declan's. The smile that spread across his face was filled with such joy and relief that it nearly took her breath away. In that moment, Kathleen knew with absolute certainty that their story was just beginning. The weeks following the hearing brought significant changes to Promise Creek. Daniel and his companions were transferred to the county jail to await trial for arson and attempted kidnapping, effectively removing the immediate threat to Kathleen and Thomas. The community rallied around the Millers, organizing efforts to rebuild the bakery with an apartment above it that would be large enough for both families. In the meantime, Kathleen had accepted a position assisting Mrs. Wilson with her dressmaking business, discovering an aptitude for the work that surprised and pleased her. Thomas thrived in the stable environment, growing stronger and more alert with each passing day. And Declan, true to his word, began courting Kathleen properly. Their courtship was unhurried and gentle, built on the foundation of trust and respect they had established from their first meeting. He brought her wild flowers picked from the prairie, carved wooden toys for Thomas, and spent long evenings on the Wilsons' porch, sharing stories of his travels and listening attentively to her dreams for the future. As autumn gave way to winter, the new bakery took shape at the center of town. Edward and Sarah had decided to expand their business to include a small cafe where travelers and townspeople could enjoy a hot meal along with their baked goods. They insisted that Kathleen and Thomas would always have a home with them, though it became increasingly clear that Kathleen's future might lie elsewhere. On a crisp December evening, with snow falling gently outside, Declan arrived at the Wilson home with a small package wrapped in brown paper. Kathleen met him at the door, Thomas balanced on her hip, the baby's face lighting up at the sight of the man who had become a constant presence in his life. "May I speak with you privately?" Declan asked, an unusual nervousness in his manner. Mrs. Wilson, overhearing the request, immediately volunteered to watch Thomas, whisking the baby away with a knowing smile. Declan led Kathleen to the parlor, where a fire crackled warmly in the hearth. He seemed uncharacteristically tongue-tied as they sat beside each other on the settee. "I have something for you," he finally said, offering the package. Kathleen unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small wooden box, beautifully carved with intricate floral patterns. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a simple gold ring. "It was my mother's," Declan explained, his voice husky with emotion. "She made me promise to give it only to the woman who captured my heart completely." Kathleen's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at him, scarcely daring to hope for the words that came next. "Kathleen Dawson, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another soul," Declan declared, taking her hands in his. "From the moment I saw you protecting your child beneath that shawl, I knew you were someone special, someone worth fighting for, worth cherishing for all my days. He knelt before her, still holding her hands. I love Thomas as if he were my own son, and I promise to be the father he deserves. If you'll have me, I want to build a life with you both, a life filled with the love and safety you were denied for so long. Tears spilled freely down Kathleen's cheeks now. Declan, you don't have to answer right away, he assured her hastily. I know it hasn't been long since your divorce, and you might need time. Kathleen silenced him by pressing her fingers gently to his lips. Declan Archer, I have known since that first night at your campfire that you were a man like no other. You saw me at my weakest and never once made me feel less for it. You protected us without demanding anything in return. You kept your promise to keep us safe. She cupped his face in her hands. I love you, Declan. Yes, I will marry you, Thomas, and I would be honored to build a life with you. The joy that illuminated his face was answer enough, but he sealed his response with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and protection. They were married on New Year's Day, 1877, in a ceremony that the whole town turned out to witness. Judge Fleming himself performed the service, having returned to Promise Creek specifically for the occasion. Thomas, now 5 months old and thriving, was held by Sarah throughout the ceremony, his bright eyes fixed on his mother and the man who was becoming his father in every way that mattered. As spring approached, bringing new life to the prairie, Declan completed work on their home, a sturdy 2-story house on the outskirts of town, with room for their family to grow. The new bakery and cafe opened to great success, with Kathleen contributing special recipes she had learned from her mother. Daniel Dawson was convicted of arson and attempted kidnapping, receiving a sentence that would keep him imprisoned for many years. The news brought a sense of closure to Kathleen, though she had already moved forward with her life, refusing to let fear of him shadow her happiness. On a warm evening in May, as Kathleen sat on the porch of their new home, watching Declan teach an increasingly mobile Thomas to stand, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. Less than a year ago, she had been a desperate woman hiding her baby beneath her shawl, fleeing from danger with nothing but hope and determination. Now, she was surrounded by love, safety, and possibilities. The future stretched before them, bright with promise. What are you thinking about? Declan asked, joining her on the porch swing with Thomas in his arms. The baby reached for her immediately, his chubby hands grasping at the air. About how far we've come, she replied, taking her son and kissing his forehead. About how sometimes the darkest moments lead us to the brightest futures. Declan's arm settled around her shoulders, drawing her close against his side. I thank God every day for leading me to that trail at exactly the right moment. As do I, Kathleen murmured, resting her head on his shoulder. Though I suspect Thomas might have had something to do with it. His crying did give away our hiding place. Declan chuckled, tickling the baby's chin. Smart boy, knowing his mama needed a hand. His expression grew more serious. I meant what I said that day, you know. I swore you'd both be safe, and I intend to keep that promise for the rest of my life. I know you will, Kathleen replied, tilting her face up for his kiss. And I promise to love you just as faithfully. As the sun set over the Montana prairie, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Kathleen Archer held her family close, grateful for the journey that had brought her home at last. The shawl that had once hidden her baby now hung in a place of honor in their home, a reminder of the day that changed everything, when a desperate mother's love and a good man's promise had forged the beginning of their shared story. Thomas would grow up knowing that story, understanding that true strength often comes in the most difficult moments, and that love, once found, was worth fighting for with everything you had. It was a legacy of courage, hope, and redemption, a legacy that would sustain their family for generations to come. And it had all begun on a dusty trail with a baby hidden beneath a shawl, and a cowboy's solemn oath that they would both be safe.